So, we are standing here at the Mao. We are having a little look around Admiralty Arch here, the old Admiralty building. And we are right at the end of the Mao, so right on the other side here of Admiralty Arch is Trafalgar Square and the centre of London. The topic of the day is James Cook, so we're going to talk about him. One of the most famous sailors in the world, and certainly one of the lasting legacies of British seafarer and exploration. His statue is right here. His statue actually came about because of a petition. There was no statue of James Cook before in London, and a nobleman was upset about that and said that can't be right, so he wrote into the Times, and through public pressure a statue was erected here in 1914, sculpted by Thomas Brock. And it's close to around the same time that Admiralty Arch came about, so that came about in 1912, at the same time as the Victoria Memorial, which is right down at the other end of the Mao, both designed by Ashton Webb. Thomas Brock is the same guy who sculpted Queen Victoria down there at the Victoria Memorial. So a lot of this has come about roughly at the same time, though the old Admiralty building here is a lot older. That dates back to the 1760s, this original building here at least. A very expensive project initially, and where traditionally the Admiralty has been based for centuries until they moved out in 1964 because there was technically no Admiralty anymore. But this is where a lot of the main decisions of the Navy used to be made, as well as inside Admiralty Arch. So it's kind of relevant to have James Cook here because he is one of the most famous people for the Admiralty, and provided many of the charts and maps and surveys that would be used subsequently by the Royal Navy and other exploring vessels. So if you can see the numbers up here, it might be difficult to see the dates, but you can see it says born 1728, died 1779. So he had a long, prosperous life, and he was known by both by his peers and his superiors as a very conscientious man. So he spent a lot of time working, and even as a kid and as a teenager, he was very hardworking and cared a lot about learning and absorbing as much as he could of navigation, of even astronomy sometimes, and mathematics and seafare, and what have you. A lot of his early childhood, he was partly mentored by Quakers, and he adopted a lot of their sentimentalities, such as staying away from drink and staying away from frivolous activity as much as possible. So while his sailors might often go to drink themselves senseless at the nearby tavern, he usually abstained from drink, which would prove very useful for him in keeping a sober and level-headed attitude to his work until his very end, but we'll get to that. Now, the most important legacies he's famous for, amongst other things, is the first recorded European contact with the eastern coast of Australia. That's why he's sometimes called the discoverer of Australia for the British, although the Dutch had beat him to it. They had discovered Australia before that, but they hadn't explored the eastern coast yet, so he could claim that for himself. He also made the first recorded contact, at least from Europeans, with Hawaiians. So he made it all the way to Hawaii, the first European to do so, and laid down lots of the charts and maps of Newfoundland, which was part of what brought him to the attention of the Admiralty, of the Royal Navy, and the Royal Society. And that's the other point that he contributed a lot to. He gave a lot of observations and reports of the celestial bodies and eclipses and the path of Venus. He sent a lot of those reports back to the Royal Society, so he contributed on a scientific field as well. And most of his big voyages were exploratory and scientific first and foremost. So he contributed quite a bit to the early Enlightenment and development of science and botany and so forth. Finally, scurvy. Him, along with a few other figures, were some of the pioneers of combating scurvy, because the Royal Society wanted to test if there were any means of getting rid of scurvy or avoiding scurvy in the first place. And his ships became some of the guinea pigs that the Royal Society tested their experiments on, providing them with unusual food for a voyage like that to make sure that they wouldn't suffer from this debilitating disease. So he's got that to him as well. Whoa! So, well, basically, so his career journey started out. He started out as a shop boy. Actually, he was from Yorkshire originally, but it was through that and through getting in touch with some of his boss's friends who were Quakers that could get him into the sailing industry, let's say, and he got an apprenticeship on a merchant vessel hauling coal, usually up from North England down to London. That's how he started out in his career at sea. But eventually he discovered that the only way to make real career progress, especially for someone like him who was a commoner, the best way of doing that was getting into the military. So he quickly got involved with the Royal Navy as soon as he saw his chance, and he joined the Royal Navy in 1755. That was the way to advance. If you wanted to advance quickly, you went into war and you tried to smash the French or the Spanish or whoever it might be back in the 1700s. But eventually, because of his efforts at mapping and surveying during the Siege of Quebec and in the 7 Years' War, where he mapped out a lot of the mouth of St. Lawrence, he caught the attention of not just the Navy, but the Admiralty and the Royal Society, because they were quite impressed with his handiwork at map making and how much information he could actually pass over to them. Added on top of that, he sent a report of an observation of Venus to the Royal Society in 1766, because he thought that these guys might have a handy use of that. Maybe he was thinking in career terms as well of making contacts. Who can exactly say? But if he did, it definitely worked, because he was then invited to become the captain of an exploration ship called the Endeavour. And he would be promoted to the rank of lieutenant, just so he was somewhat respectable enough to be commandeering the ship. There was only one catch. He had to take along a nobleman and a botanist called Joseph Banks. Now, we might save this for a future video, for a part 2 video, where I go more into detail about that voyage, because there was a lot of drama there as well, and he really had to restrain himself and keep his patience with Joseph Banks, because Joseph was quite a character himself. That's putting it mildly. Joseph was definitely not a hardened explorer. He was a nobleman who wanted to bring along his whole staff, all his dogs, and usually got himself and other sailors into trouble when he went too far away from the ship on his own little explorations and put other lives in danger. But that's material for another video. I want to jump a little bit ahead. He had 3 main voyages, and one was on the Endeavour. That was the first one. The second one was on the Resolution, where they went on a scientific journey to note an eclipse that could only be seen from New Zealand, which is one of the main missions. That was the main mission of the second voyage. But I'm going to jump ahead to the third voyage, because it's probably what he's most famous for. His very dramatic death at the hands of Hawaiians, which has often been misconstrued on both sides, either as an act of aggression on his part against the natives, and on some people, from some people's perspectives, the savage Hawaiians attacking him. I probably shouldn't be saying that, but both are wrong. Both are wrong. It was a cultural clash and lots of misunderstandings, and it was probably precipitated by the fact that coming up in his old age, he might have become a little bit sick, and his patience would not have been what it used to be before. So he made a lot of blunders there, let's say, in the diplomatic negotiations. Otherwise, his style of exploration had been characterized by very big efforts to try and engender diplomacy with any islanders that he encountered and any indigenous populaces. He actually worked very hard to try and trade with them and try and secure proper diplomatic notions with them. He even got admonished by the Royal Society that they should always keep their tempers in check and do not use the wanton use of firearms, right? Make sure you don't engage in any conflict. That was their bidding from the Royal Society. But when he was getting up in age, I suspect that his patience might have been more frayed, especially because, the Hawaiians had a more liberal notion of ownership. So when they stole, they didn't see it as stealing, but when they stole a longboat from the English, that's where tempers flared. It might well have been that they saw it as an exchange of gifts, and there was a misunderstanding there. They thought they were getting one of the goat, or could take one of the boats as a gift. It might also be that they deliberately tested the Europeans and wanted to see just how far they could go. We're not quite sure. We just know that they took one of the longboats, and that sparked the captain's ire. A little bit of context here. They had gone to Hawaii to resupply and to repair their ships, but after the couple of weeks they spent in Hawaii there, they were already getting tired of each other, and they sailed out, hoping to never see them again on both parts. But unfortunately, a strong gale came in, broke the mainmast, and they had to actually limp back to Hawaii for new repairs. And that is where things went all wrong. I've got a quote here from one member aboard the ship called Ledyard, who says, when they returned to Hawaii, our return to this bay was as disagreeable to us as it was to the inhabitants, for we were reciprocally tired of each other. They had been oppressed and were weary of our prostitute alliance, and on it goes. They were getting very tired of each other. What he refers to there in the oppression might well have been the first time Cook was there. He took fences from one of their holy sites because he needed wood to repair his ships. So he was adamant on he needed to get these fences here, but they were considered sacred by the Hawaiians, so they were none too happy about that. He tried to force a trade in and say, well, we'll take your fences, we'll give you hatchets in return. They refused. When they refused this, and the captain was not going to be able to get off the island in any time soon without the wood, he just forced it through and said, take the wood anyway, and give them their hatchet. Damn them, right? And that would be one of many of his mistakes. Coming back to when they got back the second time, one of their longboats got stolen. That's when he decided to take drastic action. And he actually abducted the main chieftain, the king of the Hawaiians, right? Whose name was, I'm probably saying it wrong, Tiriubu, king of Uihi. And he abducted him from his tent, but made it seem like an escort brought him to go along with the ship. And the king here thought, well, okay, they're just going to show me their ship again. But halfway through, he wisened up and could see that they were actually taking him as a hostage to demand their return of the boat, so they could make an exchange of the king for their longboat. When he realized that, he decided to sit down on the sand and not move a step further. And Captain Cook started dragging him then, along with his men, trying to force him to get up. He refused. Now this was causing a bit of a ruckus. And soon enough, they caught the attention of a priest, a Hawaiian priest, who started chanting at them, holding a coconut up in the air and singing a mele to them. I'm probably saying that wrong as well. And they shout at the priest to bugger off and try and threaten him to go off. Unfortunately, he manages to get the attention of the rest of the townsfolk. And suddenly the beach is full of thousands of angry Hawaiians. And the Royal Marines and Captain Cook are severely outnumbered, and tempers are rising. But again, here he makes another mistake. He keeps insisting on bringing the king along. And finally, one of the chieftains approaches him angrily, and Captain Cook responds by hitting him with the flat side of his sword. That was the final nail in his coffin. That was the mistake that would seal his doom. Because when he did that, when he whacked that guy shoved him back. Or he might have hit him with a club, we're not quite sure. And as soon as he landed in the sand, another Hawaiian saw his chance to rush forward and stab him. And he was trying to get up, trying to get ready for a fight, but he got stabbed right in the chest, fatally, probably through the heart, with a Spanish dagger that they had gifted the Hawaiians just days before as part of their own gifts. So it's a bit of a dark irony that they would be, or Captain Cook would be killed by his own gift. He died almost instantaneously, apparently, and fell flat on his face, so he fell into the water around the bay, and then a melee ensued between the Royal Marines and the Hawaiians. Of course, they were outnumbered, so they were firing at the Hawaiians while they retreated into the boats and tried to row back. About four more Marines were killed, 2 were wounded, and several Hawaiians were shot and killed. So this ended obviously in a disaster, and they limped back to their ship and prepared to set off. They couldn't set off immediately though, and one of his subordinates used a spyglass to see what was happening to his body. His body got dragged up to the town, where apparently, and this is where the story gets a bit muddled as well, but people say that the Hawaiians, they ate him. It's partially true. They held a funerary rite for him, so they actually gave him all the honors of a chieftain and an elder, which is a bit interesting, because that seems to run counter against the narrative that they were just hateful and hostile to each other. They actually paid their respects to him. And part of those rites and respects were eating the heart of that person. So after giving him his funeral rites, so ending up on that note, just clarifying exactly what happened. Yes, he was partially cannibalized, but that was considered an honor amongst the Hawaiians. So actually what they were doing there was they were showing him his last respects by eating his heart and consuming the mana, because he was considered as a man of strong mana amongst them, very likely. So it was their way of paying their respects to him. And they also probably took out his long bones, because long bones like leg bones and the like were considered sacred and holy to them. So they would have separated those from his body and maybe decorate their huts with them. Who knows? A high honor indeed. But that is the very dramatic and unfortunate end of James Cook. The British did request his remains, and they got some of his remains that they could use to bury at sea. So he was given a burial at sea. And eventually, of course, his wife got the terrible news here in London, who was living not too far from here, up in Wapping and around Shadwell, which is maybe 30 minutes away from here. We might go to there in a part 2. And that's it. Just before we leave, I wanted to mention here Admiralty Arch, because there's a funny bit of recent history about the arch here. This did have a brief spell as an extension of the old Admiralty building that we saw before. So it would have been a place where admirals could have gone for board meetings and like in there. But it didn't last very long. So it was finished in 1912. The Admiralty was no more from 1964. And in 2011, the government sold this building. Can you guess to who? Look up there. Waldorf Astoria. Yeah, it was during the recession, right after the financial crash. The government needed a little bit of extra cash. So they decided to sell off this building that they were hardly using anyway to turn into a luxury hotel. And that's actually what's happening to a lot of the buildings here in the area of Whitehall. They're basically being converted to luxury hotels. Because A, the government gets to make a pretty penny on it, and B, they don't have to spend money maintaining the building, so they can leave that to someone else. And maybe C, an argument for it could be, we'll put the building to some kind of use and other people will move in. Which is fair enough, I suppose. It's a bit funny though that they're delayed. It should have been finished last year, August, and they're still working on this here. Now the big fear is that for the next coronation, probably Prince William, if this isn't finished by that coronation, things are gonna get a little bit awkward. Because the idea was the coronation was gonna go through here, and you'd probably have a VIP lounge up there where the people that can afford it would sit up there and enjoy brandy and cigars and watch the coronation pass by under them. And coronations traditionally go through Admiralty Arch here, so if they don't manage to finish it by the next coronation, I'm not sure what they'll do. They'll have to change the route somehow, and that would be embarrassing for everyone. But I'm sure they'll manage to figure it out by then. So, we've also got the old Admiralty building here. Just wanted to mention it before we leave. Now, most of this building would have been here in James Cook's time. So, he would probably have gone here a few times when he was starting to, dare I say, smooze to the Admiralty and getting the attention of the Admiralty for his hard work and diligence. And most of this building was around from the 1720s. Parts of it that's behind there was finished in 1760. I might have said 1760 before, but that was just the screens out there that was made by a Scottish architect, whose name I forget now. But anyway, in here is where the main Admiralty used to be. For generations, it was run from here, the Admiralty. Not anymore, of course. And before this building, it used to be a timber yard for the Palace of Whitehall. So it was actually a timber yard that could supply wood for the huge labyrinth that was the Palace of Whitehall that used to be here. We're actually standing in the one of the old courtyards of the Palace of Whitehall. Hardly anything of that palace remains, though. And the timber yard, of course, is long gone as well. Interestingly enough, now that this is not the Admiralty anymore, this is the Centre for International Trade for the government. So these days, this is where the main Department for International Trade resides. And what are they doing currently? They are renegotiating lots of trading deals with various countries after Brexit in particular. So that's taken up a lot of their time currently in there. But yeah, of course, it's not got anything to do with the Navy or the Admiralty anymore, only in name. And there's a couple of interesting details. Ian Fleming used to work in there, the author of James Bond. It's where he spent most of his working life and career. And there's an interesting tradition of changing the furniture whenever there's a new department, whenever there's a new team that gets in. It changes every time with the Prime Minister. So they get to change the decor and furniture inside. But there's usually a couple of paintings, and this revolves a little bit back to James Cook, I suppose. There's a couple of paintings that usually remain, and it's usually all the paintings of English victories against the French, particularly at sea. So you got the Battle of Trafalgar and what have you, the Battle of Waterloo, paintings from the 100 Years' Wars, I'm sure. There's only one occasion where those paintings go down, and that is the few times that the French Prime Minister has and will come to visit. They actually take those paintings down, which I find hilarious. So they take the paintings down and replace them with something else. Wouldn't want to step on any toes. As soon as he's gone, though, they get right back up there. Yes, if you enjoyed, please like and subscribe. I am Kim from Invisible London Tours, and I hope you've enjoyed.